Welcome to the Leadership Dialogues. We're so excited to have you here. My name is Jeff Damagala. I serve as Managing Director of the Sanger Leadership Center, and we're really excited to be welcoming you here today. The Sanger Leadership Center is the hub for leadership development here at the Ross School of Business. We like to say our mission is to accelerate leader development through bold ideas, transformative experiences, and inclusive communities. We're known for a variety of experiences, from our Story Lab program to our Leadership Crisis Challenge experience, and we're pleased today to host our Leadership Dialogue speaker series. We've had several campus partners join us in partnering for this event, so I want to do a special thank you to the Eisenberg Family Depression Center, LSA Psychology, the Research Center for Group Dynamics at the Institute of Social Research. Today's event is a premier speaker series which features accomplished leaders discussing the latest ideas in organizational research with an ongoing practice with University of Michigan faculty member. I'm pleased to be here with you this afternoon, and I would like to introduce both our speaker and panelists. Our moderator today is Ethan Kross. Dr. Ethan Kross is a professor of the University of Michigan's College of Literature, Science, and Arts at the Psychology Department and here at the Ross School of Business. He serves as a Sanger faculty champion and founding director of the Emotion and Self-Control Lab. Dr. Kross's research focuses on how we control our thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and employing a wide range of methodologies and target populations. His research has been published amongst top scientific journals such as Science, the New England Journal of Medicine, and as well as many others. He has been a guest on many national news programs, and Dr. Kross is also the author of the international bestseller Chatter, acclaimed by critics and translated in over 40 languages. Joining Dr. Kross today for our Leadership Dialogue speakers is Matt Gutman. Matt Gutman is the Chief National Correspondent for ABC News, reporting across multiple platforms in over 50 countries. He regularly contributes to World News Tonight with David Muir, 2020, Good Morning America, and Nightline. Gutman has won many awards for his coverage and has reported on significant events including the COVID-19 crisis, George Floyd protests, and numerous terrorist attacks. He is the author of 2 books, The Boys in the Cave, Deep Inside the Impossible Rescue in Thailand, and most recently, No Time to Panic, which we'll talk more about today. Can we please give a round of applause and welcome for both Ethan and Matt?
All right. So thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Matt, for coming to join us. How are you? Are you comfortable in this chair?
I mean,
it's a little
could
deep.
be a bigger or deeper chair.
It's a little deep for folks.
It's very regal in some ways.
Yeah. If we both sit back, we have a little kid effect here with our feet dangling, but we appreciate the love. So Matt, thanks for being here. I thought I'd start by sharing with the audience how we first connected.
Please.
About a year ago, I woke up and I did the first thing I do whenever I wake up, which I shouldn't do, but do anyway. Reach for my phone, check my email. And there was an email with the title, I'm going to read it so I do it verbatim, TV correspondent who suffers panic on air. Needless to say, this got my attention. I think there was a UM record email right before it. I glossed right over that one. And went into the email, started reading, and in the email you shared your story that we're going to hear about today, and you asked if I would be willing to read the book that you had been working on, which is the book you're here to speak about. I immediately said, yeah, send me a preprint of the book. I read it in one sitting, and as soon as I was done, 2 thoughts popped up in my head. The first one was, I love this. What can I possibly do to support it? Because I think the message is so important and the writing is so compelling. So that was number 1. Number 2 was a kind of scheming thought. How can I get you to come visit Michigan? And so here we are today. What I want to do to get us started is share a clip of you in action doing what you do, which in my mind is unbelievably heroic reporting. So can we cue up that clip?
Or the way the firefighters doing what they can
to put the flames out, but this is enormous. You can see the embers that they're cast. Wow! The intensity of that is absolutely enormous. The heat is overwhelming. Those firefighters are in serious danger right now. There's almost nothing they can do with that wind. This is a firestorm. We're going to the other side of the car. Seek shelter. You can see the embers cast right there. There's firing right across the road. Get in. We're fine.
Let's get out of here.
Yeah, let's just cross. Ah! Let's cross the highway. Seconds later, a DC-9 filled with fire retardant just like sprayed all of us and the road and knocked out most of that fire. So then we came out completely orange afterwards. It's interesting that and kudos to my cameraman, Juan Renteria.
For getting this clip.
Very brave, yeah.
I mean, you watch this clip, if it didn't have ABC News, you might think it's a trailer for the next Mission Impossible, right? When you watch you in action, you are the epitome of courage. And yet, as you talk about in your book, as we're going to talk about today, alongside these heroic efforts, you've been struggling with really big emotions, anxiety, at times panic, when you are actually reporting. And so I'd love to start getting into that story of how you've managed these two sides to yourself, the courageous reporter on the one hand, and the person who's really struggling on the other. And I've got one more thing I want to say. You look like you want to get in there, though. You want to get in there?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know how to do this. This is not your first time doing one of these things.
I think people ask me that question all the time. I mean, there is this duality, and I think I talk about the paradox of the courageous coward all the time, right? Like, I have physical courage, less so in my older years than in my absolute youth when I would take moronic or almost suicidal risks, and now I take, slightly edgy risks. And this other part of me, which is a coward, is afraid to go live on television to do my job, is afraid to be scrutinized by my peers, mostly, my in-group, is afraid to be judged, fears that I'll fail. And, that duality that I think so many of us experience has colored much of my career. And maybe it's inhibited it, and maybe it's helped it. But it's something that I'm intently focused on in writing this book. And that was one of the central problems and challenges that I set out to try to understand.
So why don't you take us back to where you started? Tell us how you first got interested in journalism and doing the work that you do, and tell us about when you first began to observe anxiety and panic infiltrating into the job that you love.
So I think it might have happened before this incident I'm about to describe, because I was school council, super high achiever in high school, and school council president. And I think that I had panic attacks when I delivered the morning address every morning to the school. But the first time that I had sweat through the underpants, shaking, derealization, I'm falling through the floor, molting into a werewolf, type of panic, was delivering or defending my college thesis at Williams. And it was a thesis about Turkish-Israeli relations, and I spent the whole year doing this 200-page report, thesis, and I felt like I knew it cold, but as soon as, I forgot who it was, maybe Sarah Rafael will remember, who the chair of the political science department called my name, I froze. I couldn't get up. I white-knuckled the chair. Somehow I made it up to the podium. I felt like a pack of feral cats were clawing at my neck. I made the mistake of wearing a sweater turtleneck that day. Don't do that. Any of you defending any theses, do not wear a turtleneck. And that was my first blow your mind panic attack. I was in therapy. I'd been in therapy since I was 12, in and out. I should have had awareness. We talked back then about depression, right? But anxiety wasn't a thing, certainly not panic attacks. And I didn't know what hit me. And so for years, I just bottled it up and didn't talk about it. I assumed that it was nerves. Some sort of nerves, what? I don't know. I hope it never happens again. And I wanted to become a reporter. So I basically took 2 duffel bags. I wanted to become a conflict reporter. And I took 2 duffel bags, and after traveling and sort of freelancing in South America and Africa for about 9 months, I landed in Israel. And it was the peak of the Second Intifada. And so I spent a lot of time in Gaza and the West Bank, and I felt like this is my calling. And eventually I started doing radio for ABC News Radio. And then when I was delivering my radio pieces, which were super short, like 30 seconds, I would hold the page and I would find that words disappeared and the page was shake and what's going on? And I mangled stuff that I knew cold. And then when I started to do TV, when we came back to the States, I experienced whatever that was, this full-on experience. And I still didn't know what it was, Ethan. And it took years until I started consulting a friend of mine, Dan Harris. And he was writing this book that some of you might have heard of called 10% Happier. It's like, I'm writing this book. I don't know if it's going to be any good or if anybody's going to read it. And he started describing his panic attacks. I was like, that's it. That's what I have, panic attacks. And it was like years into it. And it just shows the level of like self-cover-up that we can do. I was literally writing about these experiences. And after a while, and after Dan, I sort of knew what it was. But I was writing about it in my own journal in hieroglyphics that I couldn't even read because I was so ashamed and so embarrassed of having this vulnerability. And it eventually came to a head. And I basically had hundreds of panic attacks on live television. The thing was, by the way, has anybody had a panic attack? Then it's...
Put your hands high up if you have, just so
and
we can
don't be
see.
embarrassed,
Don't,
okay?
Because the statistics would suggest that it's the majority of you.
Anywhere from, up to 50% of Americans are likely to experience a panic attack in their lifetimes. So you guys are very young, so you still have some years left. So a panic attack is basically your brain telling the rest of you that you're under a very serious threat and you have to deal with that threat immediately. And it makes it so unforgettable and so painful that you basically have to deal with it. And there's an evolutionary reason for that. But anyway, so I had these panic attacks and I had them hundreds of times, but it like created this kinetic energy in me when I did my live television broadcasts, and people were like, Matt, you really punch through. I'm like, no, I'm like sweating through my underpants and about to poop my pants because I am losing my brain every time I go on. But perversely, I earned this reputation as someone who's just flourished in live TV. And so I got more and more reps, and they kept sending me to do bigger and bigger things on live TV. But I never told anybody the secret. And then in January of 2020...
Well, before we go to January 2020, what did you do to manage this panic? Because we're talking about a time span of what, 15 years now before January 2020 or more? When did you start TV coverage?
Yeah. Definitely, yeah. About 15 years
So over a decade of suffering in silence with this.
Yeah.
What did you do to mask that? Because the producers, the people in the what's the term you use? Not the control booth.
the control room.
Oh,
yeah,
I got
that's
it. The
good.
control
Yeah.
room. I was close. You're trying to conceal it from them. So how did you do that?
Oh, I would do push-ups before air, because if you get like a rush, then it helps. I would eventually. Only my psychiatrist and my wife, and then my agent knew about it. So he prescribed me Xanax, which didn't quite work either, because if I took enough of it, it would just totally numb me out. But I didn't want any of the producers or anybody I worked with to know that I was taking Xanax, because God forbid any of us should have any vulnerabilities, right? We have to be perfect. So I didn't want anybody to know. So I would like rummage in my backpack, open up the cap of the thing, take out a pill and be like, and act like I'm choking while throwing a Xanax into my mouth. I smoked cigarettes because I thought that it would give me some sort of magical pre-live shot power. I showed up super, super late for the live shots because there's nothing worse than just standing there in front of the camera for 15, 20, half an hour, waiting for them to come to you. I called it icing the kicker. So I'd like slip in like 3 minutes before and they'd be like, Gutman, where the hell were you? I'm like, and I couldn't tell the truth. So I had all of these avoidance behaviors or safety behaviors. And they were mostly pretty unhealthy. And so for years, I just tried to hide it that way, which didn't quite work.
And so then in 2020, you hit a turning point. That's a pretty compelling story. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, it's a sensitive one. So, I'd cover big news all over the world for ABC. And one of the biggest stories to happen in that time was the helicopter crash of Kobe Bryant. He was with 8 other people. And it happened, I had been going like for a month, but it happened 10 miles from my house. So like immediately after it happened, we weren't quite sure what was going on. I got a call from my now bureau chief, and she basically told me what happened. And like I start to go into like full battle mode because like I know this is big. I've also got my kids there and I got to deal with them and pack them off and make sure that my wife can take care of them because she was supposed to have a day off. Anyway, in the process of reporting this, what happened to Kobe, our initial live special coverage, I'm not going to say what the mistake was out of respect to the family because it doesn't really matter. I had a panic attack, which I've had hundreds of times before, and I made a catastrophic error. Like this one was particularly in my head because my father was killed in a plane crash when I was 12, and I was the same age as Gianna, who was Kobe Bryant's daughter, and my dad was basically the same age as Kobe. And so like I don't know where this lurked subconsciously, not too deep. And I had just turned the same age that my dad and incidentally Kobe basically were at the time. So all like it's strange to outlive your parents. I don't know if anybody's done that, but like when you outlive your father, you're like, wow, it's kind of weird. And I always thought that I would die before I reached 42 because of the lifestyle that I led. So I was kind of surprised that I made it to 42, which I didn't really think was going to happen. And then I did. And then you have to deal with like, oh, I'm an adult and I have to deal with adult issues. So I made this cataclysmic error. And pretty soon we realized that it was in fact an error, and I was suspended for a month. And I was ridiculed online and death threats. And, like Kobe Bryant was an amazing person and a patron saint. And I said something that might have caused his family harm or hurt. And so people were, upset, and I understand why. And that set me on this other path where I decided I had to figure something out with panic. Because my wife knew for years that I was suffering, and I told her that I kind of didn't know if I wanted to continue doing TV because it was so like physically painful to go through the panic procedure every time I went on air. And she's like, okay, well, quit. We'll find something else to do. We'll downsize. We'll figure it out. I had some loose ends to tie up at ABC, and we both decided, like, okay, now this time I'm going to try to figure out how to deal with this and fix what's broken inside me.
And so you set out on a journey, which you describe very eloquently, and I should add at times humorously in the book. There are a lot of moments of comic relief in this book that are great when dealing with a very serious subject matter. What's the first step that you take? Tell us about some of the highlights on this journey to find some help.
It's like you have to, one of the things in life is you can't take yourself too seriously. And one of the many things that I did a lot of experiment with psychedelics, always facilitated by professionals. And during ayahuasca, I happened to poop my pants. And like, if you can't laugh at yourself when you've soiled yourself, you are in really big trouble. So there are some comedic moments and like, what am I gonna do? And the laughter and like making fun of myself is one of the keys to sort of emerging from a really painful place. Like, you can't take yourself too seriously.
You seem to have a pretty high tolerance for one other psychedelic, or was that the one where
That was ayahuasca.
That was ayahuasca.
Yeah, a really
you just
high
kept on
tolerance.
asking for more and more.
I didn't feel it, so I took like 5 times the dose, which is why we'll come back to your question, but ayahuasca
I think
has,
they'll like this more.
Yeah, ayahuasca has 2 major components. One is DMT, which is the psychoactive component, and the other is harmine, which basically makes the DMT active in your system. And that's why people vomit. And what they don't tell you in all the brochures, because it's like a big thing now, everybody's going to do ayahuasca, and it wasn't so big years ago when I went, is that you also have like diarrhea.
All right, now we're going to steer the conversation in another direction.
So, and when you take 5 times the dose, there's a lot happening, and no one tells you this. Anyway, let's move on.
Let's get a little bit more sanitary here. So I'm gonna probably not ayahuasca. What are the things that you stumble on that do make it into your toolbox?
Where's Alexa? There she is. So one of the first things was, okay, so like my basic premise was, and our postdoc student over there. I'm gonna get to you guys. What's your name?
Kate.
Kate. First thing is I marooned myself in Alaska. I knew some people who ran a sled dog training facility. They bred dogs. And I was interested in maybe optioning a book to do a film about them. And I went to go spend a few days with them. And so like I was at the kennel, and it's outside, and it's February in Alaska, and it's really cold. And I spent these days like scooping poop and plucking these discs of pee from like the dog. And it was just so rewarding because I was out.
I thought we were going to switch the topic here.
But I was out in nature in Alaska in Fairbanks, and it was this incredible first salve. And then I climbed one of the foothills of Denali, and I experienced this like Jack London tableau in front of me of like this cathedral of beauty that you cannot imagine. And I was nature drunk. And it was as if I was on some sort of intoxicant. And I was like, how is this possible? And so the healing started by like throwing myself out into nature. And by the way, then I got lost coming down the mountain, and I was alone, and it was snowy, and there was no reception. And I wound up in snow that was over my head in powder. And I don't know if anybody's experienced that, but it was like being in cold quicksand, and I was sure I was going to die. And I couldn't get out. And I had a panic attack. But it wasn't a panic attack. It was the stress response. And my body reacted just as it was supposed to. And I'm like, okay, I got this. And like immediately I realized as I'm buried in the snow, okay, how to like think. I need to get over the snow. And so I'd seen snowshoe hares, and they were navigating on top of the snow. And so like I scrambled over to the crown of this spruce tree. Spruce? Yeah. And I ripped off all these twigs and stuff and started stuffing them in my pants and in my jacket and in my hands, and basically made like a snowman and got out of there. And so some interesting things happen when you have a stress response, which is your internal GPS system kicks into high gear, right? You have no long-term memory, which is, being able to separate what was reportable in a story that you are doing and what's not reportable. But you have spatial awareness. You have superhuman strength because you're breathing in and glucose is pumping to your muscles, and you have oxygen-rich blood flowing. So you're really good at like fighting and swimming through snow and figuring out where you need to go. And so I realized like the stress response can work to my benefit. So I was nature drunk, I had a stress response, and I started to think about what's wrong with me. And I realized I thought that I was broken at this point because I didn't understand why humans would be afflicted with something so painful and so detrimental as a panic attack. Like, I almost ruined my career, perhaps jeopardized my livelihood. I've embarrassed myself. I've hurt people by accident, of course, but like maybe people were hurt by this. How is this still in the human genome? Enter evolutionary psychology. So I went to go ask an evolutionary psychologist about it. And what I learned, and this was really the first time, Ethan, where I was like, oh, maybe I'm not broken. So evolutionary psychologist Randy Nesse.
Actually, he's a former Michigan product. Sorry, we have
No,
to
no,
take credit for this. He spent his entire career here. So
basically
you could call him a Michigan evolutionary psychologist.
Michigan evolutionary psychologist, fled for sunnier environments in
Curious behavior.
yeah, curious, in Arizona, smart. But he's like, no, Matt, no, you don't understand. Like, panic is normal. Your body is willing to pull that fire alarm of a panic button 1,000 times. What do you lose? 50 calories? Okay, maybe you embarrass yourself. You run around like a chicken without a head, but you're alive. If you miss a single stress cue, danger cue, you're dead, right? The lion comes bursting out of the bush, and you're like, looking at the stars or whatever at the eclipse, and you're dead. That's why we err on the side of anxiety and we err on the side of panic. Your body doesn't care if you've suffered a little bit of pain. It cares that you're still alive. And in that sense, it succeeded. So you're normal. I was like, oh. And it's so funny. Being reassured by a doctor, an evolutionary psychiatrist is what he is, that you're normal. And, it helped me so much, just that one thing, but also learning why I'm normal. Not just being told that it's this way, but why. And it made sense to me. And so I kept going on evolutionary biology and psychology.
Well, let me pause you right there for 1 second.
Please.
Because I think that's one important gift you can give to this audience, which is if you experience anxiety or panic at times, that is a normal emotional response. Experiencing those states in and of itself doesn't make them pathological in any way, which is not something that everyone thinks of. And you actually talk about this in your book. There are some folks who believe that any form of anxiety is destructive. I think we've just heard from you that you don't subscribe to that idea, and neither do I.
Yeah. It was very nice of Ethan not to mention names right now, but there's one particular psychologist who's well noted.
Yeah,
no.
we don't have to go there.
So one of the things that I learned is that anxiety was like the best invention humans ever had. Well, it wasn't humans. It was way back into dinosaurs. But it was really primates who got scared sooner. And then apes and great apes got better being afraid. So instead of seeing the lion start to circumnavigate the edges of the savannah, the clearing here, we would be able to see that lion earlier. And instead of having to run away like a scared gazelle, wasting a lot of energy, apes and other and other primates, we moseyed on out of the way sooner. Then we got better at being afraid, and we were able to conceptualize something that might be scary, an abstract thing. And then humans became super experts at fear. And I think that anxiety and the concern about the future, this nagging dread, the concern, helped us do things like plan hunts, think about, warmer loincloths for the next season, all sorts of things that humans started to do in terms of planning and preparing because we were concerned about future events. And that was a huge evolutionary asset. So in many ways, most ways, this was a biological advantage. I was like, oh, that helped me too. I'm like, okay, there's a reason we feel anxious. We may not like it, and it may feel bad, but there are evolutionary advantages to it.
So what's working for you now?
It's working for me now. Okay, so I tried every medication that my psychiatrist could give me. I tried benzos and propranolol. I tried prazosin. Any psychiatrists or chemists or pharmacists? No. An anti-seizure medication, which can help. I had been on SSRIs for 19 years before that. ADHD medication, Strattera, which is a non-amphetamine ADHD medication, and Adderall. None of it worked. And so I knew there was something bigger going on. And I kind of knew that early on because I'd done something called holotropic breath work. Has anybody done any intense breath work? Raise hands. Just curious. Okay. So you're breathing like this, like you're lying down and it's through your belly. and a friend of mine from high school was the practitioner. And eventually, if you do it hard enough, and I do things pretty hard, not always to my advantage, by the way, you lock up because what does your body, you guys, I love smart crowds. What does your body need in order to absorb oxygen? What was that? No, but good guess. Close. Carbon dioxide. What was that? CO2. Without CO2, your body cannot take in oxygen. And so what happens when we hyperventilate, and there are people with hyperventilation disorders, you're taking in too much oxygen, depriving yourself of carbon dioxide, therefore making your body unable to take in oxygen. So when you're doing this breath work, what you're essentially doing is starving yourself of oxygen. So your body locks up and you get lobster claws. Don't take a picture of that, my friend. And basically you can hallucinate, or you space travel, time travel, you're out of your right mind. And what I'd started to understand is that I couldn't get to the emotional place I needed to go when I was in my right mind. I had to get out of my right mind. And so pretty early on, I did this breath work, and what happens, and this is a theme in the book, I started sobbing. And not just like, I was like, big cries. And my friend Lane, who was the practitioner in this studio, and like I'm hysterically crying and these people are all in the room, he just comes and grounds me, which is just putting his hands on my legs or wherever, but he put them on my legs, just letting me know I was there without stopping me from feeling the emotion. So often we hand people a tissue. Stop the crying. It's like a subliminal, stop the crying. It's okay. Shh. It's okay. It's okay. No, cry, emote, feel. And throughout all these things that I started doing, like I did, psilocybin mushrooms and ayahuasca and 5-MeO-DMT, which is Sonoran, the secretions of a Sonoran desert toad, and ketamine, and tree frog secretions, which is just pain, no hallucination. It's just to make you suffer and cry. So I started doing all these things that basically made me feel. And eventually I realized I need to better tap the crying, the sadness, the grief, I call the well of grief inside me, in a way that maybe doesn't require psychedelics. And eventually I learned how to get to that place without taking drugs, in a more holistic way. And I'm not, if you want to try those things, great. If you do, please do it with a professional guide or facilitator. Otherwise, you're just on a joyride. But if you want it to actually have like medicinal and psychological benefits, do it the right way, please. Thank you.
And there is, of course, a budding scientific movement to explore the implications of taking these kinds of substances for emotion regulation purposes. When you apologized to the audience before you went through that litany, I thought you were going to talk about poop again. So thank you.
It's crying and poop. It's the whole book.
Yeah.
Summarize the book in 2 words.
This is going to be very hard to top in subsequent years. But take it a beat further, because you said you found other tools to instigate some of those states. So breathwork being one. Is there anything else that you rely on now?
No. I mean, there are things I rely on when I feel anxiety, but I think the big stuff I learned how to deal with. Like, I know that I sometimes need to cry, and it's okay to cry. And, I thought that I was pretty emotionally attuned, but I wasn't enough. And so I learned how to tap into that to basically feel the emotion I'm feeling at the time. I have a bunch of acute tools that I deal with if I'm feeling acute anxiety, but it's different than dealing with the big stuff that I had to punish myself to go through in order to figure out where this better place for myself.
But the common theme that I'm hearing when you talk about dealing with the big stuff or the acute anxiety is that you use tools, plural, multiple things. There was no single magic pill that you took, either literally or figuratively, to deal with that. Is that true? And the subtext to the question is, one of my biggest pet peeves, as you know, is when folks come calling asking, hey, what is the one thing that the world should do to manage their anxiety? or their depression or their anger. And as a scientist, I can't point to one single thing. I don't think it exists. And my sense is that you lived that experience.
So Ethan and I are products of the 90s where authenticity was paramount. Like we care, like, no.
You're very
Also-
generous. We dipped into the 80s.
Yeah, we're the ladies there. But we really our formative years were in the 90s.
that's fair.
Okay. Everybody wanted me to have the solution for the book. Like, what is the solution to panic? You must have the solution. What is the answer? I'm like, I don't have the answer, and I'm going to be dealing with this anxiety and the propensity to panic my entire life. This is work. It's every day. And there are lots of different modalities that I used. I can't tell which one is the best. I can't say I won't have another panic attack in my life. I probably will. But at least I won't hate myself if it happens. I won't carry around 1,000 pounds of shame if I feel a panic attack. I won't think that I'll be ostracized from my friends and my group and my colleagues if it happens. But yeah, there are a million different things. I can do some tricks of the trade if like anybody really wants some easy to use tools for if you're starting to feel a panic attack, but maybe we'll save that.
Yeah.
Or I can do whenever.
We can save that for some questions. I have a lightning round approaching.
Hold on, but I have one other thing to say.
Take it away.
That, and maybe it's already too late for that, but I set out in 2020 and for the next like 18 months or so, not to write a book. I didn't care about anybody else at that point. I was just trying to fix me because I was broken. I felt I was broken. And so it wasn't until well over a year later when I started finally being able to tell people that I had panic, like admitting it to my friends and colleagues. Almost universally, it was met with a shrug. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I get panic attacks on air. They're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, it's really big. They're like, oh, okay. I got so much more acceptance of it than I thought that I would. And that was a huge relief.
And I think that is a function of the generation that we grew up in where, I don't know of a single person who ever used the term panic in middle school or high school or even college. And yet, my wife is sitting here in the audience. She doesn't like me probably pointing that out. But our daughter, once on the soccer field, came to us after sprinting to score a goal. I was like, oh my God, Daddy, I'm having a panic attack. I'm like, no, you're not. You're out of breath. But it's in the lexicon, right?
Yeah.
This is something now that is much more accepted in a way that it certainly wasn't when we were growing up. Which brings me to another question. So you've really gone from one end of the spectrum in terms of concealing this side of yourself to the other. We just talked about pooping pants, right? And so what has your response been? We've got a lot of emerging leaders in this space. They're going to be going into corporate America and other kinds of organizations. They're going to be struggling with all kinds of big emotions that make their lives and their jobs difficult. Have the benefits of being open and authentic about this experience, have they trumped the experience you had when you concealed it? Would you recommend to folks that they be more open about these kinds of experiences?
Yeah, I think just in terms of public speaking, if you are feeling really nervous, it's okay to say, I'm feeling really nervous, or whatever it is that you're feeling, take a breath and then come back to it. And people will totally understand because they feel the same way. Speaking publicly is not a natural phenomenon, right? Again, going back to Alexa, my friend here in evolutionary psychology and biology, humans in the caves 20,000 generations ago were not like doing Zooms and worrying about their background, right? We did not speak publicly. There was a chief, maybe that person spoke publicly, but the rest of us were going out and hunting and gathering and doing our things. This is not so natural, so people feel nervous. And so that's what I would tell emerging leaders. Don't worry about it. Everybody else feels the same way, and it's okay to diffuse that initial tension by just expressing how you feel. And again, that stress response is also beneficial. It's there for a reason. And sometimes it'll give you that energy boost that you might need, that it might actually punch up your delivery even more And one other thing, if you are experiencing a panic attack, two things that you need to know, or anybody who is close to you who experienced it. One, you feel like you're going to die, but you're not. No one has ever died of a panic attack. Okay? It will not kill you. Two, it seems like it's eternal, but it only lasts from 15 to 90 seconds max. That is the period of your brain assessing the threat. Once the threat is assessed, all right, I'm speaking publicly, oh my God, I'm losing it. And you realize that where you are, your brain has assessed the threat, it's realized it's not going to kill you. The rest of that is anxiety. And all of us live with anxiety, except for Ethan, who's really one of the coolest people that I've ever met. But
We're going to invite my wife on stage in
Yeah.
a second to give you the insights.
But most of us live with anxiety every single day. We can manage that. So after the 15 to 90 seconds, you're through the worst of it. You're going to be okay. Promise you. By the way, this is a major deal. About 40% of people checking themselves into ERs every day across the nation, thinking that they're having cardiac arrest or some sort of heart trouble, are actually having a panic attack. And 58% are experiencing either panic or some sort of anxiety-related event. So it's so real and so physical that many people do actually feel like they're going to die, which is why awareness is so important.
And to this point, one of the issues that I find myself thinking a lot about, just to bring it full circle back to the digestive system, is I'm not going to let you live this one
No, you
down.
won't.
But how many times did you learn about how the digestive system operates growing up? You probably learned about it in junior high, probably learned about it in high school, maybe college if you took a bio class. When did you ever learn about how the emotional system operates in you? And might it be to your advantage as well as the advantage of millions of other people if they have some sense of what is this stress response that I'm going to likely experience at some point in my life? Might that prevent unneeded hospitalizations or anguish if we were to educate people about this stuff?
Where is the 15-minute intervention to dental health or gut health?
That's right.
I ask you. I mean, how come psychologists aren't clamoring to get this into every school in America? Noting that suicide is an epidemic in this country, and depression and anxiety.
I think this is the topic for a fantastic investigative journalist piece that you might want to do. And I know some people who might want to be interviewed.
I wrote an op-ed about it, and I think that there are lots of psychologists who are interested in it, but I think there should be more of a proactive movement. It's kind of shocking, but I guess changing the curriculum in general is extremely difficult. And then,
Yeah, I think that's
not my field.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that's the perfect place to pause here and turn it over to the audience for questions. And so we highly encourage you to ask any questions you have about anything that we've talked about here in this space. I see a hand going up in the back. Please don't be shy. We've got about 15 minutes or so if you'd like.
And
You can say something.
I'll stay if you guys want to ask.
Oh, no, you're not supposed to say that.
Okay. I'm not going to stay.
Yes, thank you.
Hi. Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate your time and your perspective. So you talked a lot about being challenged, and being challenged is part of the human experience. And I'm really curious how, as an individual, when oftentimes, research shows that when you have a new perspective presented to you, the human brain actually processes that as being attacked. And you're in journalism, right? So you experience lots of new perspectives all the time. How do you, as an individual, cope with that, reaction, and then still try to report the story in a truly authentic and factual manner? And then how can journalism as a profession also deal with that? And I think part of social media is actually filling that role, right? There are already biases established, and so changing that narrative is really hard. So how would you deal with that as an individual and then as a profession?
Yeah, I love that question. That's a great question. One of the reasons that I became a journalist is because I'm really curious. And I am someone who, I feel, at first I became a journalist because I wanted someone to pay for my travel. honestly. Like I wanted to see the world, and I didn't want to pay for it. I wanted someone had to pay for it, and it wasn't going to be me. So like you can't do that for a living. And I was curious about people. And then once I started doing journalism, I realized that because I'd suffered, some hardship as a child, and I had this, this trauma of my dad being killed, I was able to communicate with people in this mutual language of grief. And I learned that I felt what they felt, and I felt sympathy. And sympathy is not necessarily feeling bad for someone. It's the ability to put yourself in their shoes. And I realized that that was something that I could do, and that I was interested in doing. And so my goal pretty quickly became, after starting journalism, was to be able to tell the stories of people who don't have the platform to tell their own stories. And so have I succeeded? Not always. Do I try? Yes. But that's definitely something that's interested me. Thank you for your question.
Got a hand right up front, right over here.
This has been really exciting. You mentioned a number of tools that you've used. I didn't hear you talk about any night dreams that you had, and if you would look at those dreams or examine those dreams during the daytime or with any practitioner to get another level of understanding.
Interesting question. So lots of dreams, a very, very vivid dream life since early childhood. A lot of chatter in my dreams, a lot of repetitive stuff.
Why don't we ask the audience, does anyone here ever get chatter banging around their head in the middle of the night, maybe causes you to wake up? Show of hands. Pretty common experience.
Yeah. And I've talked to psychologists about it, but do you mean like other types of psychics? No? No.
And it sounds like you're
I went
asking
to a
about-
psychic
yeah.
too. I did psychics. I like literally tried everything for the panic. I went to psychic and an Akashic reader. Anybody had Akashic? Yeah. So like I was trying everything. So the answer is yes, and I don't know, like how, yeah. I don't know. It didn't seem, yeah, interesting. I'm gonna look into that more. Go back to the dreams.
Hello.
Hi.
So you talked about showing your emotions. It's okay to show your emotions. My question is, like, when is it okay to show like angry emotions? Like when you at work, when is that okay?
We have this conversation in my household quite a bit. I think it's okay to be angry. I think it's less okay to, it's okay to express the anger. It's not okay to act it out, right? So we don't want to be physical in our expression of anger, but we can register to people that we have anger. So it's okay to say you're upset, but it's not okay to lash out at other people because you're upset. But
Yeah, it's a great answer. If you want the textbook definition of anger, it's like all emotions, it's functional. It serves a purpose when it's experienced in the right dosages, which is what you're describing. And we experience it when something happens that we disagree with, and we think there's still the possibility to correct the situation. So anger is sending a message that's saying, hey, this isn't right, let's fix this. And I think that's a really useful tool that we as human beings have in our toolbox of skills to communicate when it's in the right dosages and when you cut it short and don't start.
so what happens when you experience something that you disagree with and there is no hope of changing it? What's that emotion?
Sadness.
So
that's how
anger
you
is
get
almost has an element of hope to it.
Absolutely. There
something-
is the possibility to fix the situation. Sadness is something violates our perception of the world. I have a parent or a loved one who I no longer have. My world view is now shot, and I cannot repair that situation in that moment. That's when we experience sadness, and that leads us to withdraw and start reflecting on our circumstances a bit to try to rewire how we're making sense of the world. You can take any kind of emotion and put it through this kind of analysis to see, hey, when do we experience it and why? And when you do that, you find that all emotions are useful when they're experienced in the right proportions.
That's both super interesting and really depressing, right? It's just a little sad. Okay.
Other questions?
One more question.
Come on, we can do two.
Such a people pleaser.
I'm definitely a
Hey,
people
Matt,
pleaser.
great discussion. So you did highlight about the coping approaches, but in your world, especially, like, you have to be mindful, like, with everything that's happening around. Like, did you have something like to do with mindfulness, like while you were dealing through all of this?
Thank you so much for that. Anybody ever do TM, by the way? Transcendental meditation? Okay. So
Share.
Ethan and I both did it, and as kids, which is different. Mindfulness and meditation are different, by the way. Similar worlds, but apparently in TM, all the kids get the same mantra, but they tell you that your mantra is only yours, that you're the only person in the world who has that mantra, and you're never allowed to tell anyone in the world about your mantra because it's just yours, so never reveal the secret. How about that scam? Anyway.
Yeah. I read Matt's book, and he violates the rule of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and articulates his mantra, so you better watch out.
Inga, there you go. That's my mantra.
And I'm like, holy shit, it's the one that I got when I was 5. And so, instant source of connection.
Yeah.
With every other person who's gone through that system.
So I do a lot of mindfulness. I do walking meditation and walking by, just thinking about my feet touching the ground. And one of the tools that I now use when I'm starting to feel anxious before going on air, and we just talked about it before coming here, is I feel gratitude for having the kind of job that gets me an adrenaline jolt almost every day. Like, how cool is that? A lot of people have things that just bore them, and they struggle to achieve feeling alive. And I get, 120 volts through my guts, every night. And so I still feel nerves going on, and I also do another mindfulness technique. But I also turn it on its head and be like, that's cool. I get to do something that's pretty cool, and I like it for the most part. And I'm decent at it, and I get to feel this experience, which is actually the thing that I really like. I pursue adrenaline everywhere else, and here I get to do it. So yes, another quick mindfulness trick for anybody who experiences anxiety or is feeling an impending panic attack. So visualize 5 things in your field of vision. Colorful, bright things like camera in the back. There's a little bit of red in the wisps of seagrass or whatever that is. The bright lights, the yellow of the Michigan and somebody's sweatshirt right in front of me. The red of the clock here. So 5 things you see, then 4 things you hear: the hum of the room, the echo of my voice, the rustle behind us, a little bit of a whisper. 4 things, and then 3 things you feel: my butt on the seat, my shoulders in the jacket, the ring on my finger. 2 things you smell, 1 thing you taste. You get the point. By the time you go through those 5 senses, start with 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I pretty much promise you're going to get through that anxiety or panic if it's acute. So that's a little trick that I wanted to get to. I'll take one more, just because I like talking to people. Unless we have to cut it off.
Do we have one final question?
If there are none, you don't have to feel any
We've
pressure.
got 2 actually. So let's see who the lucky person is.
Thank you. So you talked about like having these panic attacks for 15 years. You had over 100 of them, and you talked about like the fear of embarrassing yourself among your friends, your peers, etc. And I guess like over that 15-year span, like, did you have any negative consequences with friends, family, things of that nature, and how did you deal with it?
It's a really good question. always had, the only way I experienced panic until I wrote this book was going on air or performing somehow, and which is also a very natural thing. We're afraid of being judged by our peers because there are two major types of human fear. One is being eaten by the lion, and the other is being cast out of our group. And physically, the human body interprets social rejection as near death, right? Our immune system plummets because we're not going to be around humans anymore. And our inflammation soars because a lion's going to come and take a chunk out of our butt. And so, you know, it's natural to feel that way, but it did take a toll on me. And it made me kind of miserable, I think, and a little bit of fearful. And so maybe in terms of my family, before like talking about panic, I was maybe a little bit more irritable and harder to deal with than afterwards. But when I did the panic book, I was doing something at the end. I was doing cognitive behavioral therapy, and one of the things they do in cognitive behavioral therapy is to test your threshold for panic by giving you carbon dioxide, CO2 challenges. And so I did like a lot. Did I tell you about this? I did a lot of CO2 breathing, which is breathing 35% carbon dioxide. And what happens when you breathe 35% carbon dioxide?
Uh-oh.
I didn't have any. I was a champ. Like, I got through it because any physical challenge, I will get through. But that same day, or after like a weekend of CO2 challenges, I went to somebody's door because ABC's like, hey, you're in Austin. Can you please follow this story? This woman was killed in this man's house, and you know, we think we're going to do GMA in 2020. Can you go investigate the story? So I'd knocked on hundreds of doors in my life. I never have had a panic attack talking to someone. That's my superpower. I knock on the door, the guy answers the door, and I choke. I had a panic attack. And then I'd never had a panic attack talking to people. So in my head, I'm like, oh my God, I've just spent 3 years writing this book, doing all this research, trying to teach people how to get through panic. And I just lost it all by having yet another panic attack in a novel way. What is happening to me? And I turned it on its head eventually because I was like, oh, no. Yes, new type of panic attack, but I'm now experiencing a new way to feel, to put myself in someone else's shoes, to sympathize with someone, to empathize. This is another arrow in my quiver. This is good. This is great. And I flipped it on its head. Also, I'd had a lot of CO2 coursing through my brains and through my body, and I realized that it's okay. But I added something else. And again, it's just like building yourself up and learning that each one of these experiences is okay and will hopefully eventually lead to healing, but the work is never quite over. Anyway, that was a long-winded answer to a concise question. Thank you.
Well, it's time to wrap things up. One thing I want to do is just revisit that idea of the paradox of the courageous coward. In my professional opinion, this is no longer relevant to you because what has become clear to me in just talking to you over the past year, reading your book, seeing you talk about these things is the courage that you display on camera has now been surpassed by the courage you have displayed in talking about your circumstances. So I'd love for us all to just give a round of applause to Matt for doing that. So, and then I want to give a plug to a book that is not just a plug that I would give to any author. When I think of this book, this is a book, here, I'll hold it up high. This is a book that is not only a book of scientific substance, but this is a book that is compellingly written, just as you speak, and everyone here has just experienced. I want to read to you what I wrote about your book on the back, because it's genuine, and I hope it will entice everyone here to pick it up. One of those rare books that seamlessly weaves page-turning personal experience with scientific discoveries in ways that entertain, educate, and enlighten. Matt Gutman writes about his personal quest to vanquish anxiety with the flair of a poet, the rigor of a scientist, and the curiosity of a swashbuckling investigative journalist. So you're going to have a chance to get a book, have him sign it. I would not turn that opportunity down. Thank you for being here with us.